Assalamu alaikum students. Hope you had a blessed Ramadan and happy belated Eid Mubarak to all of you. The topic we'll be discussing today is the cardiac output, witness return and their regulation. I hope you are now familiar with these terms, cardiac output. So the question is, does the heart or the peripheral circulation control cardiac output? Both of them, but more so important is the peripheral circulation. The cardiac output is the quantity of the blood that is pumped into aorta each minute by the heart, and the venous return is the quantity of the blood flowing from the veins into the right atrium each minute. Now you can see here in the diagram the peripheral circulation, which includes all your major systems, the renal flow, the GI, skin, the skeletal muscle, for example, leg flow, and whatever happens after exercise, all of it returns to the heart. And the heart pumps as venous return, and the heart would pump this as cardiac output. So the cardiac output largely depends on the venous return, and both of these should match each other. The cardiac output should be equal to the venous. Now here you can see this is the venous return returning from the cerebral, coronary, renal, gastrointestinal, skeletal and the skin tissues back into the right atrium. This is the venous return, and through the right ventricle, after passing through the lungs into the left atrium, and then the amount ejected from the left ventricle as cardiac output, then back into this is the percentages of the cardiac output that is being supplied to different tissues or systems: the cerebral, the coronary, the renal, gastrointestinal, skeletal muscle and skin. And as I said before, both of these should match one another. So now, putting the definitions for cardiac output and the venous return, we have discussed the venous return and the cardiac output must at each point equal each other. Now coming to the, this is a graph, as you can see, having an x-axis and a y-axis. On the y-axis you have cardiac output, and on the x-axis you have work output during exercise. As you can think, what is the effect of exercise on cardiac output? The first answer that comes into your mind is that it would increase. Now how does it increase? First of all, whenever you just think of exercising, the central command, that is you have your anticipation of the exercise, like I want to start doing some exercise. So this originates in the motor cortex or from the reflexes initiated in the muscle proprioception when exercise is usually anticipated. What changes does it cause? It causes a sympathetic outflow to the heart and the blood vessels, it is increased. And if the sympathetic outflow it increases, what does the sympathetic outflow increases? 3 points. It increases heart rate, it increases heart contractility, and it increases cardiac output. Then what does it cause? It causes constriction of the arterioles, the splanchnic and the renal, as you can recall from your sympathetic system. And then there's constriction of the veins, which would increase the venous return. So this is the central command, just the thinking of the anticipation for exercise, getting ready for exercise. These things start on happening. That is, your sympathetic outflow to the heart increases, and if it increases all these things, anticipation for the exercise. Now, what would be the local response when you start exercising? There would be vasodilatation metabolites usually released as a result of metabolism, and these cause dilatation of the skeletal muscle arterioles, which usually causes decreased total peripheral resistance. So this is also going to increase the blood flow to the skeletal muscle. Now on this graph you can see the red line, it shows the cardiac output, and the blue line, it indicates the oxygen consumption. And as the work output during exercise is increasing, you can see the cardiac output is increasing from a normal of usually which we consider 5 liter. You can see here at about 30 liters per, or more than 27 liters per minute. So this is a graph showing cardiac output curve. Now you can see the normal cardiac, this is a normal cardiac output curve, and you can see the plateau of this curve is around 13, about the cardiac output is about 13 liters per minute. This is about 2.5 times the normal cardiac output. The normal cardiac output is about 5 liters per minute. This means that a normal human heart functioning without any special stimulation can pump an amount of venous return of about 2.5 times the normal, over and above the normal. Now this upper line, you can see the graph, you can see it is a cardiac output curve for a hyper effective heart, a heart that is more effective than the normal. Now, what factors can cause such a heart to become it a better pump? Number one, you all know, is nervous excitation to increase heart pumping. That is a sympathetic stimulation and parasympathetic inhibition that increases the heart rate, the contractility, and makes the heart a better pump. Then the second would be increased pumping effectiveness caused by the heart hypertrophy. For instance, the marathon runners, they have increased in mass for about 50 to 75%. This increases this plateau level of the cardiac output here, as you can see. And sometimes it can increase this cardiac curve up to 60 to 100%, and therefore allow the heart to pump much greater than usual amounts of cardiac output. And then if you combine the nervous excitation of the heart and the hypertrophy as occurs in marathon runners, the total effect can allow the heart to pump as much as 30 to 40 liters per minute, about two and a half times the level that can be achieved in average persons. This is important for you to remember, that over and above its capacity, how much cardiac output can be pulled together by the heart. Now here you can see a hypoeffective heart. So any factors that decreases the heart's ability to pump blood causes hypoeffectivity. For example, if there is increased arterial pressure against which the heart must pump the blood, as occurs in hypertension, it would cause an hypoeffective heart. Inhibition of the nervous excitation of the heart, that is inhibition of the sympathetic nervous system. Then if there are pathological factors like abnormal heart rhythm or heartbeat or heart attack, for example, coronary artery blockage, valvular heart diseases, congenital heart diseases, cardiac hypoxia, myocarditis, and the list goes on, it would cause a hypoeffective heart, a heart with decreased tendency to pour out the cardiac. So now these are the flow charts which dissects the basic concepts of how it would increase the cardiac output and how the parasympathetic decreases the cardiac output. We have done this in detail when we're doing the nervous stimulation and the coronary circulation. So you just go through this slide by yourself. Now here's another graph or pie chart which is showing you the blood the cardiac output at rest and then at light exercise, and then again same at rest, and then you can see at the heavy exercise. Here you can see the distribution of the cardiac output in form of percentages and mLs. Cerebral, coronary, renal 19, splanchnic is 24, skin 9%, skeletal muscle at rest is 21%. But at light exercise, you can see the skeletal muscle blood flow, you can see outflow, you can see 47% of the cardiac output is going there. And the splanchnic circulation has reduced to about 12%. Then during the heavy exercise, you can see a lot of circulation, 71%, that is about 12,500 mLs, is going to the skeletal muscle because they are in actual need of excess of oxygen and everything, metabolites for their metabolism. And the splanchnic circulation, which was initially at 24, has now reduced to about 3%. Now another important parameter for you to memorize and know is cardiac index. Sometimes we usually measure cardiac output in terms of per square meter of the body surface area. Measure the body surface area and then we calculate the cardiac output, and this is the cardiac index. So for a 70 kg adult, surface area is usually around about 1.7 square meters. So the average cardiac index for adult calculated is about 3 liters per minute per meter square of the body surface area. What could be the effect of age on cardiac output? On cardiac index, or you can say, for example, rising at the age of 10 years, the cardiac index rises because there is more surface area, more muscle mass, but the muscle mass declines as you age and the metabolism decreases as you age, so it would be decreased to about 2.4 at 80 years of age. It would be about 4 liters at 10 years. The average normal would be considered as 3 liters per minute. So it depends on overall bodily metabolic activity. Here is a graph which shows the same thing. Here is the age in years and this is the cardiac index, and you can see it is maximum around this age, that is around 10 to 15 years of age will be maximum, and as the age increases the cardiac index decreases because of decreased metabolism, loss of muscle mass, decreased activities. So here in this graph you can see the cardiac output curve, and this is a cardiac output, and it shows the effect of different levels of total peripheral resistance, which is on the x-axis, different levels of the total peripheral resistance on cardiac output, showing a reciprocal relationship between cardiac output and the peripheral resistance. So here you can see the normal marked as x, usually at 100 uh, uh, of the peripheral resistance mark at 100% mark, the cardiac output is normal. But as you increase the total peripheral resistance in percent, that is about 120, 140 to 160, you can see that cardiac output is decreasing reciprocally. And similarly, if you are decreasing the total peripheral resistance, to decrease the total peripheral resistance, cardiac output is increasing. So there are certain conditions, diseases in which you have a very high cardiac output, as beriberi, AV shunts, arteriovenous shunts, hyperthyroidism, anemia. And then there are different conditions in which you have a very low cardiac output. For example, if you increase the total peripheral resistance by removal of arms and legs, you reduce the surface area, and another condition is hypothyroidism, which we'll discuss in subsequent slides. So you would decrease the cardiac output with increasing of the total resistance. So when the total peripheral resistance increases above the normal, the cardiac output falls. Conversely, when the total peripheral resistance decreases, the cardiac output increases. If you remember the Ohm's law, it would be very easy for you to correlate this graph, which state that cardiac output is equal to arterial pressure, that is directly proportional to the arterial pressure divided by total peripheral resistance, and it has a reciprocal inverse relationship to the total peripheral resistance. Now, under most normal, unstressful conditions, the cardiac output is controlled almost entirely by the peripheral factors that usually determines the venous return. However, if the returning blood does become more than the heart can pump, then the heart becomes the limiting factor that determines cardiac output. The heart has in itself, usually depending upon the peripheral factors, because the heart in itself has different mechanisms. You remember the Frank Starling mechanism, the different nervous stimulation, whatever amount of blood is coming, it is stretches the heart to the same variable amount, and it pumps that blood to the circulation. Heart has inbuilt mechanisms to circulate the blood flow. It is mostly the peripheral factors that are important in determining the cardiac output. But however, in disease condition, if the heart cannot pump, if there is inbuilt error in the heart, in stretching of the heart, in nervous stimulation of the heart, then only the heart becomes the limiting factor that determines the. So cardiac output, these are the important concepts about the cardiac output, and this is a review of your previous concepts. Cardiac output is sum of all tissue flow that is affected by their regulation. It is 5 liters per minute, and cardiac index is a normal 3 liters per minute per meter square. Cardiac output is proportional to the tissue oxygen use, and cardiac output is inversely proportional to the total peripheral resistance when arterial pressure is kept constant. And therefore you can put this into a formula. Cardiac output is equal to the arterial pressure, which is the difference of the mean arterial and the right atrial pressure divided by the total peripheral resistance. So a combination of factors together determine cardiac output. These include the preload, the afterload, and the contractility and the heart rate. What is preload? It equals the end diastolic volume. And what is the afterload? It is the end systolic wall stretch or the resistance against which the heart has to pump the blood. And to increase cardiac output or increase stroke volume, you need to increase the heart rate or increase both. Preload, the initial stretching of the cardiac myocytes prior to contraction, and it is related to the sarcomere length. And afterload is that the load against which the heart has to pump. It is related to the aortic pressure. Contractility or ionotropy is the inherent ability of the myocardial cells to develop force at a given muscle length. And you are well acquainted with it, the ionotropic agents, which we have done in detail. And then the heart rate, which is usually maintained through the autonomic nervous system. Now, this is a graph showing the different diseases in which you have, this is a cardiac output percent of control, which have a greater cardiac output. For example, beriberi, AV shunts, hyperthyroidism, anemia, anxiety. And then you can come here down this graph and the low cardiac output. So very high cardiac output and a low cardiac output. You can see here this is the cardiac index normal of 3, and you can see in certain diseases, for example in beriberi, you can see the amount of cardiac output percent of control, it is around 185. So how does these diseases, every disease have its own pathophysiology, would cause an increased cardiac output? First come to beriberi. Now beriberi is a disease that is caused by insufficient quantity of vitamins, that is thiamine, which is also called as B1, vitamin B1 in the diet. So lack of this vitamin causes diminished ability of the tissues to use different cellular nutrients, and the local tissue blood flow mechanism in turn cause marked compensatory vasodilatation. So there is vasodilatation everywhere. So long-term levels of venous return and cardiac output also increases to twice as normal as a result of these the total peripheral resistance, which is usually decreased as little as 1/2 the normal. So decreasing the total peripheral resistance would be increasing the cardiac output. Now the AV shunts, if there is a communication between a major artery and a major vein, then tremendous amount of blood flows directly from the artery into the vein. This too would cause a greatly reduced total peripheral resistance and likewise would increase the venous return and cardiac output. Now in hyperthyroidism, the metabolism, usually most tissues or almost every tissue of the body becomes greatly increased. Oxygen is used. If there is greater metabolism, greater the use of oxygen, and greater the vasodilator products are released, and therefore the total peripheral resistance decreases markedly because of the local tissue blood flow mechanisms. So there would be an increase in cardiac output and a decrease in total peripheral resistance. Now in anemia, there are two factors. First of all, reduced viscosity, and then there is local vasodilatation. Both of these factors in anemia would cause a cardiac output to go up, increased cardiac output factors. And then we have the diseases at this end, which usually are the low cardiac output, which causes low cardiac output. So pathologically high cardiac output diseases we have. So in a case of the pathologically low cardiac output, we have cardiac factors and non-cardiac factors. So the cardiac factors, we have discussed them already. Severe coronary blood vessel blockage or MI would lead to a low cardiac output because it would affect the contractility of the heart. Severe valvular heart disease, myocarditis, cardiac tamponade, and cardiac metabolic derangements. So all of these would cause a pathologically low cardiac output. Now the non-cardiac factors. First is the decreased blood volume. Uh, for example, if there is hemorrhage, so you lose a lot of blood in hemorrhage, and this loss of blood, what does it do? It decreases the filling of the vascular system to such a low level that there is not enough blood in the peripheral vessels to create peripheral vascular pressure high enough to push the blood back to the heart. So it would cause a low cardiac output. Acute venous dilatation. Certain times the peripheral veins usually become vasodilated. And when they are vasodilated, for instance, an example could be fainting, which often results from sudden loss of sympathetic nervous system activity, which causes the peripheral capacitant vessels, especially veins, to dilate markedly. Now, this decrease in the filling pressure of the vascular systems, because the blood volume have no longer create adequate pressure, is now in this flaccid blood vessels. As a result, the blood it pools in the vessels and does not return to the heart, so it would also cause a very pathologically low cardiac output. Then the obstruction of large veins. For example, if the veins that are leading to the heart become obstructed, so the blood in the peripheral vessels cannot flow back into the heart. So consequently, the cardiac output falls markedly. Then we come to the fourth one, that is decreased tissue mass, especially decreased skeletal muscle mass. So now with our normal aging or with prolonged periods of physical inactivity, there is usually reduction in the size of the skeletal muscle. So that in turn decreases the total oxygen consumption, of course, and blood flow needs of the muscles, resulting in decrease in the skeletal muscle blood flow and cardiac output. And the fifth one here would be a decreased metabolic rate of the tissues as well. For example, as occurs in hypothyroidism, or if a patient is on a prolonged bed rest, the oxygen consumption and the nutrition needs of the tissue will be lower. So this would decrease the blood flow to the tissue, resulting in reduced cardiac output. And another example I told you is hypothyroidism, which also reduces the metabolic rate greatly. Regardless of whatever the cause is, either it be the cardiac cause or it be the peripheral cause or the non-cardiac factor, if ever the cardiac output falls below the level required for adequate nutrition of the tissues, the person is said to suffer from circulatory shock. Now, to perform better quantitative analysis, it is necessary to distinguish two primary factors concerned with cardiac output regulation. One is the pumping ability of the heart, which is represented by the cardiac output curve, and the other would be the peripheral factors that affect the flow of the blood from the veins back into the heart, and that is the venous return curves. So first of all, we're doing the cardiac output curves in different quantitative analysis. Here you can see a graph on an x-axis. You can see the right atrial pressure and cardiac output on the y-axis at different intrapleural pressures. We'll be doing the normal ones and then doing the shift of this curve towards the right or towards the left. Now the normal external pressure is usually equal to the normal intrapleural pressure, that is the pressure within the chest cavity, which is usually around -4 mm of mercury. So you can see as the intrapleural pressure rises to about -2 mm of mercury, the shifts the entire cardiac output to the right. You can see it here, it is shifting towards the right. This is the normal one and it is shifting towards the right. And why is it? This shift occurs because to fill the cardiac chambers with blood requires an extra 2 2 mm mercury of right atrial pressure to overcome the increased pressure on the outside of the heart. So likewise, if we increase the intrapleural pressure to a positive 2 mm of mercury, it would require a 6 mm of mercury extra pressure, right atrial pressure from the normal, that is about -4 mm of mercury, which would shift the entire cardiac output curve to the right as well. So there are some cardiac factors that alter the external pressure on the heart, and thereby shift the cardiac output curve either towards the right or towards the left. So first we'll discuss the normal. which is the cyclical changes during the intrapleural pressure during normal respiration, which is about plus or minus 2 mm of mercury during normal breathing pattern. But if we are breathing during exercise sternus breathing, it can be about plus or minus 50 mm of mercury. Breathing against a negative pressure, here you can see if we are breathing, it would shift the curve towards the negative, towards the left, if the intrapleural pressure is around minus 5.5 mm of mercury. Now, during surgeries, usually the surgeons, they open the thoracic cage, and by opening the thoracic cage, the intrapleural pressure usually goes up to zero, about 0 mm of mercury, and shifts the cardiac output curve to here at zero. It would shift also the cardiac output curve to the right. Positive pressure breathing would shift the curve to the right. Cardiac tamponade is a condition which means accumulation of large quantity of fluid in the pericardial cavity around the heart, with resultant increase in the external cardiac pressure and shifting the curve towards the right. In cardiac tamponade, the upper part of the curve is shifted more as compared to the lower part of the curve. It is because the pressure rises to higher values as the chambers of the heart fill, and this is to increased volumes during high cardiac output. Now, this is combination of two major patterns of cardiac output curves showing the effect of alteration in both extra cardiac pressure and the effectiveness of the heart as a pump. A hyper-effective increase in a cardiac output would be at the expense of an increased right atrial pressure, and similarly, a hypo-effective heart, as we have discussed, would be reduced cardiac output, usually at the expense of a lower right atrial pressure. Now, when we'll be doing the venous return curves, so factors which aid the venous return is usually the respiratory pump and the muscular pump. The pressure changes created during the breathing usually suck the blood towards the heart by squeezing the local veins, and here you can see this is a milking of the blood towards the heart. You can see this is a muscular pump, the muscles, and there are the presence of the valves which usually ensures just one way and no backward flow of the venous return, so that it can only go and dump into the heart. It is one way transit. Usually these valves, they prevent the backflow during the venous return. Now there's a term always used that is called as a mean systemic filling pressure. So, what is mean systemic filling pressure? When both the arterial, for example, if you consider a situation in which both arterial and the venous pressures come to an equilibrium, with all flow in the systemic circulation ceases, usually at a pressure of 7 mm of mercury. So, this is called as a mean systemic filling pressure. The factors that would be resisting the venous return, determining the venous return, would be the right atrial pressure and resistance to the. So this is a normal venous return curve. In this curve, you can see when the heart pumping capability becomes, let me take a marker. The heart pumping capability becomes diminished, and as the right atrial pressure rises, the backward, this increase in the pressure of the right atrium, what does it do? That it causes a backward force of the rising arterial pressure on the veins of the systemic circulation, decreasing venous return to the heart. So if there is a decreased venous return, so there will be decreased cardiac output to match it as well. And if all the nervous circulatory reflexes are prevented from acting at that point, so if the right atrial pressure usually rises about plus 7 mm of mercury, here you can see such a slight rise in atrial pressure causes it would decrease the venous return to almost zero, and such a slight rise in the right atrial pressure causes a drastic change in the venous return, because the systemic circulation is usually in a form of a distensible bag, and an increase in the back pressure as caused by increased right atrial pressure would cause the blood to dam up in this bag instead of returning back to the heart. So if no venous return, no cardiac output as well. So here we can see the effect of changes in the blood volume, total blood volume on the mean circulatory filling pressure, uh, that is the volume pressure curves for the entire circulatory pressure. So what is the mean circulatory filling pressure? Whenever we stop the heart pumping, no matter by what procedure, So what happens that the blood flow ceases everywhere. Without blood flow, the pressure everywhere in the circulation becomes equal. Now this equilibrium at which the pressure has reached equilibrated pressure is called as the mean circulatory filling pressure. Now, strong sympathetic stimulation constricts all the sympathetic blood vessels as well as the large pulmonary blood vessels and even some chambers of the heart. Therefore, the capacity of the system decreases so that each level of the blood volume, the mean circulatory pressure, is increased. And with a strong inhibition of the sympathetic nervous system, the mean circulatory filling pressure would be decreased. Now venous return curves showing the normal curve here. This is in red, which is the normal curve, and then you can see the a curve in blue and a curve in green. In the green, you can see that we have increased the mean systemic filling pressure, which is a normal at about 7 mm of mercury. If we increase it at about 14 mm of mercury, you can see that the venous return curve, the venous return has also increased. And decreasing this pressure, the systemic filling pressure means systemic filling pressure to about 3.5, it would decrease the venous return curve reciprocally. So here in this graph also representing the venous return curve, you can see the normal curve at normal resistance, uh, and then at half resistance and two times greater resistance. Now this is the venous return curve. Whenever this curve shifts in a clockwise direction upwards, it means it indicates that there is a decrease in the total peripheral resistance, and whenever the total peripheral resistance is decreased for any given right atrial pressure, there is an increase in venous return. You can see the blue line here. There is an increase in venous return because of the dilatation of the vasodilatation of the arterioles, which allows more blood to flow from the arteries to the veins and back to the heart. But here you can see if this the normal curve, you can see here, this is which is in the red, if it moves anti-clockwise, it means uh, that there is a counterclockwise rotation of the venous return curve, indicates that there is increased total peripheral resistance. And whenever the total peripheral resistance is increased for any given right atrial pressure, there is a decrease in venous return to the heart because of vasoconstriction of the arterioles and decreased blood flow from the arteries to the veins and back to the heart. So this diagram, this also shows the same pattern. This is a normal venous return curve. This is the clockwise increase because of the half resistance. It means there is decreased total peripheral resistance, and the one shown here would be that anti-clockwise with a half, one third resistance or two times more resistance. The curve shifts anti-clockwise or counterclockwise. Now finally the measurement of cardiac output. There are a lot of ways in which we can measure the cardiac output. The one which is important for you from examination point of view is the oxygen Fick method. You must memorize this method. There is a formula for it given in your guide, and just go through it. Here it's over here, that is cardiac output is equal to oxygen, total body oxygen consumption divided by oxygen in vein minus oxygen in artery. This is a total oxygen consumption would be given to you, the oxygen in the pulmonary vein would be given to you, and the value for the oxygen in pulmonary artery would be given to you. Just have to put the values in this formula, and then you can find out the cardiac output. This is also called as the oxygen Fick method. It is important from exam point of view. Usually you have to calculate through this method. Then for other research methods, they have been mentioned in your guidance are these two methods, the electromagnetic flow meter and the indicator dilution method, a thermal dilution method. Now in the indicator dilution method, a small amount of indicator is, for example, a dye, cardiogreen dye, for example, it is injected into large systemic vein or preferably the right atrium. This then passes through the right side of the heart, then through the blood vessels of the lungs, through the left side, and finally into the systemic arterial system. Now, the concentration of this dye is recorded as the dye passes through one of the peripheral artery, which gives us a curve, and then we usually we calculate the measurements from this curve. This is usually mostly used in research purposes. The method that you guys should memorize, and usually you get the MCQs on it, usually oxygen fic method, which is used vastly. So I guess this is all for today's lecture. If you didn't understand anything or some concepts are not clear to you, you're always welcome to email me or WhatsApp me. Your queries would be answered. Take care and stay safe.